If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hey all, I just wanted to note that in the intro to this episode, I refer to the November episode as having Amy Sally as our guest co-host. For you, that is actually the December episode, but we usually record a month ahead, and I got confused. That's all. Enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. In this episode, we have author and video game creator Paul Jessup. Diane, how are things going?
Yeah. We discussed before we opened the show what I was going to say about this. My life's a mess right now. So I apologize to our listeners if I'm a little off today. I have a friend who's having a major health crisis right now. This led to a mental health crisis for my friend. Their mental health crisis caused me a mental health crisis. I think that I have been public before with my PTSD diagnosis.
I believe so.
It brought up stuff and a recovered memory. That's the first time that has ever happened to me. I had a complete breakdown. I was goo on the couch crying for 3 days, and I am putting myself back together at the moment. So I may sound a little weird. My concentration is shot. I may go off on tangents, and I figured I could be honest about this and trust our audience to bear with me. People say they really like the fact that we're real, so I'm going to be real, right? Or I could put on a sugar coating and a false front, and people would say, why is Diane acting so weird? And you wouldn't know. So thanks for bearing with me. I hope your week's been better. How are you?
Oh boy. Well, we are in the 10th month of the worst year of my life.
Oh God.
So not particularly great. It seems like the truly horrible stuff has stopped, and now we're just at the annoying, expensive stuff.
Yeah.
That's happening. Like my phone broke 2 days ago, so.
Oh no.
Yeah, just out of nowhere, the screen stopped working. It just turned black and blobby and green, and the memory and everything still works. My alarm still keeps going off, but I can't shut it off.
Oh no. Oh, that's a nightmare.
Which is... Yeah. And then of course our audience knows I'm ADHD, so I've got multiple alarms all the time to remind me, like, okay, take your meds, oh, now it's time to do this thing, and now it's time to, so my alarm is like constantly going off, and I can put it on snooze by clicking the side button, because the mechanics of it completely still work. The whole inside still works, the memory still works, just the screen is broken.
Right.
But I can't shut it off or change it.
I get that. I've been kind of a slave to my alarms too. That I have an infection, like it was in my throat. I think I don't know if I ever mentioned this on a program, but I mentioned this to Alan. It's I was concerned I wouldn't be able to do the podcast for my throat. I still have the infection. I think it's a dental infection. I got a root canal done, but it still hasn't cured the problem. I'm going to a specialist, but I have to wait, and I'm on a cancellation list, but they haven't called me. And in the meantime, I am on antibiotics every 8 hours. Ugh. And if I miss the dose by more than a couple of hours, the infection starts coming back. Right.
Oh,
so
God.
It's, on top of everything else, Oh, and did I mention that the, one of the side effects of the medication that I'm on is to increase anxiety and depression?
Oh, dear Lord. Yeah, that would kill me. I had my first ever panic attack, I think, probably like 2 weeks ago. And I almost had one this morning. So, yeah, the mental health of this podcast is not the best right now.
No, we're not the best. That was what was going on with me. It was a 3-day panic attack, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, rough go. If you guys have never had a panic attack, I'm glad, right? I don't wish that on anyone. It's basically the screaming horrors, right? And, all the stuff they describe. I had all the stuff they describe in horror novels. Like, my hair stood up on end for 3 days.
Like Cthulhu.
Right? I had cold sweats. I was terrified. It was awful. I really hope nobody, if you've had it, I sympathize, I understand. And if you haven't, well, shit, I'm glad. Don't recommend it.
Yeah. Not fun. Mine wasn't that bad, but it was bad enough.
Yeah.
But
Hope Punk, right? Hope Punk. We are here.
Keep on moving forward.
We are moving on with our lives. We are doing the thing. And I'm very excited for our guest today, actually.
Me too. But before we get to our guest, and kind of related to what you were saying, Diane, I want to make a quick announcement.
Awesome. Okay.
So, as Diane has mentioned, she kind of needs a little bit of a break. So we are giving her a break for the November episode. And Kat is going to be in Spain teaching a writing course for her school. I am out of co-hosts for November. So what I did is I invited Amy from the Hugo-nominated podcast Hugo Girl to come on and be my co-host for November.
That's cool. Right on.
It's going to be super
sorry. Cool. I'm sorry, by the way, that I, am dropping the ball on you.
No. Don't be sorry.
I'm really glad that you found a solution. That's awesome. And I look forward to it. It's going to be fun.
No worries. Don't be sorry. We've been trying to connect up and do something together for a while. So it's no big thing. I'm just excited to be able to do it. And you need a break. Everybody needs a break sometimes. And Kat is off living her best life, which I can't complain about that. So, it is what it is. No big deal. Well, let's get to our guest.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Paul Jessup, and we'll be right back with him. Okay, and we're back. We have Paul Jessup, who is a best-selling video game designer and award-winning short fiction writer, active pro member HWA, which is the Horror Writers Association, if you don't know. And his new book, Glass House, is out now from Underland Press. He also has stuff in Apex Magazine, Clark's World, Nightmare, Interzone, Pseudopod, and more. Welcome, Paul.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be here.
This has nothing to do with any of my questions, but I did not know that you had stuff in Clark's World, and I am an avid Clark's World reader, and now I have to go and find your story.
Oh, it was a long time ago, back when Nick Mamatas was editing for Clark's World, like at the very start.
Ah, okay.
Yes, I don't know if you remember that, but that was like the first year, I think, I was in there.
Oh, that was before my time. I mean...
Yes. Long time ago. There's actually with a short story. It was okay. There's actually a little funny story there. So at the time, like I'd got an offer. Postscripts or PS Publishing?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like a British publisher. Okay. They had a magazine called Postscripts at the time, and I had a few short stories in there. And so the editor, Peter Crowther, came to me and said, "Hey, how would you like to do like a small mini anthology? I'm doing those for some people. Can you make unique stories?" I'm like, "Sure. I'll create like 6 unique stories." Cool. And so he's like, "They have to be unique to here, not anywhere else." And on a whim, I sent one to Clark's World thinking, Nick just rejects everything. I just want to see what he'll say. And of course he buys that one.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh crap, I don't know if he can take it. I should talk to Pete. And he's like, talk to Pete. And he put it in quotes, like I was making somebody up or some like lowly person. I'm like, well, yeah, it's, PS Publishing. Is like, oh, okay. Go make sure. And it was okay. It was fine. The interesting thing though, is if you look for the version on Clark's World, it has a different ending than the one that was published in Glass Coffin Girls, which was that anthology. Because both I and Peter Crowther liked, I think Nikki Gavers actually was the one who edited that, liked the original ending better than the one that was changed for Clark's World. Both endings are good, I think. It's just kind of interesting, the differences between the two. And the original ending is going to be also I've got a short story collection coming out from Underland next year called The Skinless Man Counts to 5.
Awesome.
Ooh.
So that obviously sounds like horror. And I know you write mostly horror, right?
Yes.
Okay. Last episode, which was our October episode, we started discussing horror. And the horror is not something that we normally talk about a lot on this podcast. When we started this podcast, we were more like, we're going to be more science fiction focused with maybe some fantasy thrown in. Over the summer, I went to StokerCon and I am now newly excited by horror. And I want to kind of do a deep dive into horror a little bit, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
Fantastic. So let's just start with like really basic. What attracts you to horror?
I don't know. I mean, that's actually a really complicated question because I've loved horror since I was really little. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think I just really enjoy being scared. Like there's a thrill that comes with it. I just like, and I like being creeped out. I like things. There's appeal to me of I guess you call it the furniture, the style, the gothic trappings of it, like the cobwebs, the mists, the ghosts. I remember being a kid obsessed with the intro to Mystery on PBS. Mystery Theater, I think it was called, something like that, where it had like Edward Gorey art. Mm-hmm. And then I was so let down by the show because it was just like Hercule Poirot and stuff. And I wanted that creepy Edward Gorey kind of art to be the show. When I saw the commercial for Beetlejuice when I was really, really young, I was obsessed with it because like it just looked so cool. I wasn't allowed to see it because I was too young. Mm-hmm. It had this similar kind of look and feel to it. And so
I am 2 years older than you. I got to see it.
My parents were very strict about my parents don't like horror.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because like I wanted to see Ghostbusters. I wanted to see all that stuff. Like, no, there's a commercial.
I saw it all.
Remember when came out and the trailer for that, I just loved it. I thought it was a haunted house movie because all it showed was the house and like somebody like falling out of the window and screams. And I'm like, ooh, that looks creepy. I want to see that. And like my mom's like, not a chance. No. But I had a grandma and my aunt, who was only 7 years older than me, my aunt. She was basically like an older sister. They loved horror. And so they kind of like went behind my parents' backs.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm very excited that Alan is willing to do some deep diving into horror because I have always been a fan. I grew up on Stephen King and, John Carpenter and, all that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Good stuff.
Clive Barker I discovered in my early teens,
Yeah.
And for me, right, okay, so I've had some stuff happen in my life that's pretty horrific.
Yeah.
Right? Horror gave me context, right? I was able to read it and other people, fictional or otherwise, demons, monsters, whatever it is, right, are experiencing this overwhelming thing that terrifies the shit out of them. And somehow they are still managing to function, right, and deal with whatever the horror is. So I think it's kind of like a vaccine against terrible events,
Yeah, I can see that. And also it's a way going back to like where you're talking about Hope Punk before too. I mean, in a way, I find horror, even the ones with the very dour endings, to be very hopeful because it's about people in impossible situations. And it's about them surviving and not like being like finding a way to keep going, even when it's like something so terrifying. Most people would just go no and like run away.
Right. Exactly.
Especially with fiction. Like, I mean, I think there's a real honest difference between fiction and movies and stuff. Like how horror is being approached.
I so much want to set up a panel about hope in horror because I interviewed Ellen Datlow last year. And I was like, so what do you think about hope in horror? She's like, no, there is no hope in horror. That's it. I was like, wow, okay.
She also famously dislikes cozy horror.
Oh, interesting. No John Wiswell for her.
Yeah, no, there was like a whole thing on cozy horror and she was like very against it, very, very much against it.
I admire her greatly, but she's wrong.
Yeah.
I debate her about it. Yeah, that's cool.
I think it's because when most normal people hear cozy, they think of something different than when horror writers hear cozy, or horror readers too. Like because I was talking to one of the people that coined the phrase and they're like, well, disemboweling can be cozy. And I'm like, only a horror reader would say that.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
I found that absolutely hilarious. I just laughed and laughed and I was like, I can see that point actually. I understand it. But I think like a normal person would be like reading this book that somebody considered cozy and hate it. Yeah, that was a huge argument. And it actually came out on the side of cozy horror because I love T. Kingfisher. Her work was just, it's just, I love it. And so many people were just like going up against her saying, no, that's not horror at all. That's not horror. Like the twisted ones. Oh, that's not horror. I'm like, it is. It's horror. It's great. I love it. And like, but it's not scary. I'm like, I hate people saying that. I liked it. It creeped me out. It was wonderful.
Creepy horror that's my wheelhouse. Like I am not into the disemboweling stuff. I am not the extreme violence stuff. I can put up like with a moderate amount of violence, like your average fantasy or science fiction story, violence, whatever, no big deal. But when you're like graphically describing someone being disemboweled, no, I'm done.
Okay. I have to ask then, what did you think of Glass House?
Glass House. Okay, so
Because it's funny. Wait, let me just say real quick. I didn't think it was gory, but then everyone who read it told me it was, and I'm like, I reread it. I'm like, well, I guess I could see that now.
That's funny.
I did not find it particularly off-putting with the gore, personally. Yeah, I mean, I can't even think of a single spot where I was like, oh, that's too far. You know what I mean? None of it seemed too far to me. Yeah. I was worried for the children in the story quite a bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was really my main concern.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing. I think when I wrote it too, they were the heart of the novel. Too,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, that was very important to me because, like, really, also the big thing that I was dealing with there is the fear of that novel. I think is the fear of the parents not being there for their kids. Like their fear is like, if I'm so caught up in this thing that I'm not realizing that my kid's in trouble. Yeah. And to me, that's like a fear, even though I'm constantly like, you know, my kids are adults now, which makes it even worse in a way, you know, because there's even more worry with the internet and everything else. But I'm constantly worrying, like, am I attentive enough? Because, you know, we're talking before about neurodiversity and stuff, and I get lost in my stuff, you know. Yeah. I fall into, like, you know, writing and reading and like all this other stuff. And I just go down these rabbit holes and I worry, like, well, what if I'm not paying attention enough to them and something happens?
Yeah.
And that's the fear of the book.
No, absolutely. I actually have a note that said, these parents got what they deserved. So, slight spoiler, yes. The parents get what they deserve.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly okay. There is a body count. It's a horror novel.
Yes.
But we won't say what happens to the kids.
Yes. No, we won't say what happens to the kids.
No spoilers there.
Yeah, I was like, oh, man, these parents, they're just like awful people.
Well, I hope they're understandably awful, though.
I mean, they are. As somebody who, and I'm going to reference the dad in particular here, I guess I probably relate most with him, even though he did stuff I would never, ever do in 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. You know, just to give a brief outline for the audience, the father is a professional filmmaker, right? And he gets like really involved in his art to like a psychotic degree, maybe. And, you know, he starts working on a new project and then he gets really deeply involved in it. And he kind of, like everything else, kind of phases out. But as a parent who, you know, has a 9-to-5 job and then also has, you know, as I say, I'm a maker. Like I have to always be making something. And right now it's this podcast. In the past, it's been bands, you know what I mean? And music. But I always have some element of whatever I'm making going on in my head at any time. Like it's just always there to some degree.
Yep.
And I can understand being sucked into it too much, you know? I mean, there's definitely times where I probably should have been like, hey, kids, let's hang out. But instead I'm like up here editing the podcast or, you know, trying to finish the novel so I can interview our guest or whatever, you know what I mean? So like, I do think there is an element of that, you know?
No. That's basically exactly what I was pulling on with him. Exactly. Because I as a writer, as like a guy who makes like video games and like all that other stuff, you know, you get caught and wrapped up in it and you don't see the exit. You know what I mean? You start ignoring the people around you. You get in your own world. You're so just caught up. And that scares me, you know, that like somehow maybe, you know, that might affect my kids. And I'm one way. I mean, this isn't lucky. I'm not saying that this is a good thing, but in one aspect, since I'm like separated from my ex when they were little growing up and stuff like that, when I had them, I could set aside time just to focus on them. So I could balance it. But when like before that, because they were real little before that too, when I was we were all living in the same place and I was with them all the time, I wasn't doing that, you know? So I think in a way, like, I mean, that also fed into the novel too, like in my own parents, like divorce and separation, things like that, coming from the kid's point of view. I think in a lot of fiction, divorce doesn't get portrayed emotionally accurate. And I wanted it to be,
you're not wrong.
I wanted it to feel like that in the novel. And it was a hard place for me to go, to reopen those kind of emotional things. Obviously, none of that stuff is stuff that actually happened to me. Because,
right.
You know, nobody had sex with the house.
Yes.
Nobody, like, you know, I didn't like put my daughter in a coffin and bury her alive. You know, God, that scene was so hard to write. It was stomach turning. It terrified me. I had nightmares right after
that's
writing it.
interesting.
I understand.
Yeah, but I'm glad I did because it's just holy crap. But
Yeah.
I think that's the one thing I don't like about horror is I've got to. I feel like I have to scare myself. I have to go after the stuff that scare me. I can't pull back, and but I guess it's therapeutic to do that.
You said so much that I feel like I could grab on to any one of those things and keep going.
Yeah.
Diane, do you want to talk about the divorce thing a little bit? And if not, I could jump into something else.
I mean, okay.
If you don't want to, that's fine.
Fresh wounds, right?
Yeah.
But sure, right? For that reason, right? Grab the bull by the horns, face your fear, right? My parents fought a lot growing up. They didn't get a divorce, but they probably should have.
Same as mine.
Right? It was, a lot of the stuff that has come up recently actually is related to the time when they were actively fighting. So that kind of emotional, like that's very visceral for me right now, that whole emotional, what the hell is going on? The whole world is falling apart. Is this my fault? How can I fix it? Is there any way to fix it? The parents are supposed to be the ones that understand what's going on. They don't seem to have a clue. They're not available. I don't know what to do. Supper hasn't been made. I guess I got to make it, like stuff like that. Right. It's, if you're delving into those fears, right, as like, I gotta be honest, I haven't yet read it. Obviously, my life went to shit, so I haven't done anything. But
probably the wrong book for you right now, actually.
Maybe it's the right book, right? Maybe it's the right book for that reason, right? But exactly, right. So good for you for trying to take that on, and we have kind of a blasé attitude about it. I think a lot of us have this kind of background in our childhood, and we kind of that was then, and we don't ever really look at it, right, and think about how it affects us now and our relationship with our partners, for example, or, our worldview.
Yeah.
Right. So, good for you if you're making that the central fear, and also good for you for addressing, like it's a fear of mine, right? I'm a parent, and all my kids are grown and living on their own now. But I remember being very concerned that I was spending far too much time with my art, right, and not enough with my kids, So that's cool. That's cool. That's a theme to explore. Good for you.
Yeah, I think it's actually worse for mothers than it is with fathers, though. I think fathers are expected to be distant, though I never wanted to be because my father was distant,
There is more cultural support for that. I agree. But I don't think we feel any differently. Maybe, if anything, fathers have more anxiety about it because they recognize the necessity, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, those are two things that I really wanted to cover in there too. Is like from going from the fear on the parent side and from the child side, just from going through that myself. There's actually a scene where one of the kids starts making dinner because like the parents are just off in their own worlds, and there's stuff like that too. And there's like a scene where like the word divorce starts getting brought up, and the one girl, she's psychic now because of being buried alive, as
sure, valid
Stephen King logic there. Well, she like sees a ghost and stuff like, well, anyway, so she gets warned ahead of time that the divorce is going to be brought up, and she sees it as being the end of the world. And so like an apocalypse. And so she hides herself in a room and refuses to let them say it to her.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because like, I remember how that was. I mean, that's, that's how it is. Like when you're that little, and like, as like people have not been through that. Cause when I was getting my divorce, my ex had like, her parents fought all the time and she thought they should have gotten divorced. So she came from it from the point of view where like, well, this is better for them. They'll understand it. They'll understand it and be like, oh, okay, you guys are fighting all the time. This will be better for me. And I was like, coming from my point of view, which is, no, that's not it at all. They probably don't even realize what's going on, which is what happened. I mean, it was devastating for my kids. And I knew, like, I felt it because I had the same problem, And so when I didn't write this right after that, it was like, I think 3 years after that happened, because like writing right away would have been too much. and it took me a while to get this published because like it was just too raw a wound to keep revisiting, But then eventually when I actually did get published and I reread it with like a lot of distance, I think it was like 5 years distance at that point. And I was just like, well, this is actually a really good horror novel. And I'm feeling like a sense of catharsis now reading it that I wouldn't have gotten before. And so
Awesome.
I was like, I'm really glad this is coming out now because now I can stand by it and be proud of it. And like, if it would come out like right after I wrote it, it'd still be something that shook me.
So you mentioned the psychic child. We've mentioned the house being sentient, basically.
Yes.
I believe we've mentioned ghosts to some degree. So this book is just chaotic as hell. There is so much going on in this book.
You can see my ADHD.
That is very true now that you mention it.
Perfect, made for us.
Yep.
What was your, well, maybe I should ask this first. Did you do that intentionally? And if you did, what was your intention in throwing all of that in there? And if not, like looking back, how do you feel about that?
Okay, I did do it intentionally. What I wanted to do was I wanted this to be an haunted house novel, commenting on all the different kinds of haunted house movies and books that I've read over the years. So I wanted to be like a comment on all of it. Because like you've got cosmic horror haunted house, which is like Hellraiser is technically that sort of thing. You've got the Shirley Jackson style haunted house where the house itself is sentient. And then you've got the haunted house where like there's a ghost that's trying to possess people, like The Shining, Amityville Horror, Conjuring. That's like probably the most common, other than the Shirley Jackson one. So I wanted to really comment on all those things and like kind of just throw it in like a blender and see what happened. I also wanted all the characters to kind of have their own relationship with the house and with the different, like with their own creatures and have them all kind of like play off of each other so that in the ending, that kind of like explodes.
Yeah. I hadn't even realized that until you just mentioned it, but
yeah, I wanted it to be like the haunted house. and also too, like I really wanted it to like mesh together because like I knew that there was going to be like the ghosts of the 60s cult. That was like the main thing. And I knew that they were trapping the spirits. I mean, they were trying to trap these evil cosmic entities inside to try and save the world in their own misguided attempt by trapping them in the house. And then the house being sentient just happened like as I was writing because it was the first chapter. And like the mom is just like falling in love with the house. And all of a sudden it's becoming literal as I'm writing, like not just a metaphorical falling in love with the house. Like, oh, the house is kind of like reacting to her like a lover's touch. And I'm just like, this is all right. I'm not going to shy away from this. I need to go in with this too. And it just kind of, and then I was like, well, how am I going to fit this in with the rest of it? I'm like, oh no, it fits in perfectly because right after my divorce, I got into a relationship that was obsessive, the other person. And that is something I want to talk about too, because like when you get out of a very long-term relationship like that, especially if you've like the last time you dated anybody was like when you were in your 20s and now you're like in your 30s, late 30s and close to 40s, everything is different.
Oh yeah.
And you're very like vulnerable, like extremely vulnerable at that point, you don't know. And so like, yeah, I got into an obsessive relationship and it was not quite like that, but it was, inspired by that,
Interesting.
Not quite, I'll kill you, but like it was scary at some points.
Yeah.
We're not shying away from any of the stuff today, are we?
No. It's a very anxiety filled novel.
With anxiety filled people talking about it.
Yes, I know. This is like a Woody Allen novel.
Kind of is.
A lot of nervousness.
Cool.
You mentioned the relationship with the house becoming literal at some point, but I think having read some of your past stuff too, you're very good at going like between metaphorical and then the metaphorical becoming literal and then back again, and to kind of create this sense of like, I have no idea what's actually happening.
Yeah, that ambiguity.
Yeah.
I love that kind of ambiguity. Yeah. And it's playing with our expectations as science fiction readers.
Yeah.
Because like we're always about literalizing the metaphor.
Yes.
And I think in horror, there is some literalization of metaphor, but there's ambiguity there too. So like,
Yes.
it plays with it a lot more than science fiction does. I love both for that reason, and, I've done both like a lot. Actually, most of my early stuff was sci-fi horror, that was and it's still like some of the stuff I'm more like well known for, but I wanted to go straight up horror with this and with my next one. My next one, there's some sci-fi horror in there. It is. It's not much space sci-fi horror, but it's like more Nigel Neal Stone Tapes kind of sci-fi horror.
You read that essay too. I forget. Was that one of Spider Robinson's essays? It was the essay where science fiction readers read things literally.
Yep.
And this is why people have difficulty who aren't trained to read science fiction, right? You describe the green sky, right? Mm-hmm. And science fiction readers think, okay, yeah, the sky is literally green. Okay. Yep. So we're on another planet or something. And most people who don't read science fiction think, what is that the metaphor for? What are they describing there?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Horror lives on that knife edge where you're not quite sure what is literal and figurative.
Yeah.
It's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things like I learned from an early age from like Stephen King and,
valid.
I think for my 11th birthday, my grandma didn't want to give me Stephen King because she's afraid my parents would take it away from me. So she gave me classic horror short story collection. And that was like my Bible for a while. And like, trying to think of his name, the short story is called The White People. Oh, no, I'm just drawing a blank on the name now, of course. So I want to say M.R. James, but that's not M.R. James. Oh, Arthur Machen. And that just like blew my mind because it was just like that. It was playing with the metaphor. Is it real? Is it ambiguous? Is it actually happening? Is it not? And there was a few other ones like M.R. James's Oh, Whistle and I'll Come to My Lad. Such a great one. And, just stuff where it's like, is this actual? Is it not? And I just love that. It's just so creepy.
There's a couple of novels there. The Talisman was the first one that Stephen King and Peter Straub co-wrote. Yeah. Peter Straub is better at that dreamlike sort of, is this reality or is it not? Right. And I think that combined with Stephen King's very grounded kind of, almost hyper realism in terms of the way he does his characters, I thought it was just brilliant. Right. I've reread that several times because I love that. Yeah.
Have you read Black House?
Not yet. It's on my shelf.
It's so good. Yeah, it's the follow-up, and it's so good.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
It's like neck and neck. Those two are so good. You know what's really funny? I read somebody online said you could tell Stephen King had just written The Talisman with Peter Straub because they said it borrowed a lot of stuff from Peter Straub.
That's true. I can't argue with that. Yeah.
And then I guess Peter Straub, I've got his book. I haven't read it yet. The Floating Dragon, which is also about.
Oh, I read that one.
Yeah. They said there's a lot of Stephen King influence in that one. And I want to read it because it does the same thing it does, where it's like every, I think 28 or 32 years or something like that, something happens.
Right.
And so I'm really interested in that because I think one of these days I'm going to write a book like that, where it's like the reoccurring horror. I love that. It's fun stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I remember reading that. I think it was Spider Robinson. I remember Delaney also talking about that too.
Might have been Delaney. I don't remember. I should know, but my brain is a mess right now. So.
I bet you it was just something that was discussed at conventions and then they all wrote about it.
That could be.
Yeah. Delaney was like loving how like, I think he said like, it was one of Asimov's Foundation stories and he said the door dilated. And he said, you could not read that in a literary novel because like, they would be confused. They would be perplexed. What's the metaphor? What? Door dilated. In science fiction, they're just like, oh yeah, the door dilates, like an eye. It just opens like an eye.
Yeah, it's a lens. It opens and it shuts. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I thought that was so cool. Yeah. Oh God, Orson Scott Card. I'm not a fan of his. But like when I was starting out, I was reading all the how to write science fiction books, and I read his How to Write Sci-Fi, and he actually mentioned there how he's in front of a class of students teaching, and he said, okay, who here read this short story? And there's like a scene where it's like mentioning how the train was like a snake. And he said, who here was confused and thought it was actually a snake? And they raised their hands. And who here thought it was like a snake-like metaphor? And people raised their hands. He's like, okay, so how many of you read science fiction? The same people raised their hands that thought it was literal. And then he went to that explanation. And I'm like, oh yeah, because that was where I first heard about it, was in that. And I was like, he's right. He's so right.
Yep.
It's why James Joyce confused the hell out of me when I was in college.
I guess, Yeah, I found him difficult too, actually.
It was like all metaphor. That's all it was metaphor.
Yeah, it's all metaphor. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like when you come from the literal perspective, the literalized metaphor, I was like, what is going on?
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love James Joyce now, of course.
Yeah. I love his prose so much.
Yes.
Yep. Delaney is when I read Delaney, then I was able to read James Joyce after that somehow. Like after I read, what was the really weird one? Not Grendel, Dahlgren. Dahlgren.
That's it.
Yeah, because it was Grendel rearranged, Dahlgren. Yeah, that's that. Yeah. I read that and it blew my mind. And then I was like, I need to read more like this. And somebody said James Joyce. I'm like, all right, I'm going to give it a shot.
That's interesting. So my story is my reading history is a little bit different. I started with Stephen King, like everybody did.
Oh yeah,
and a little bit of Ray Bradbury because my uncle was a huge Ray Bradbury fan.
Love Bradbury.
So I started with those two, and then I kind of I stuck with the horror and the crime kind of stuff, like Dean Koontz and I can't remember who else I was reading at that point. And then I kind of got more into fantasy, and I started reading like Lord of the Rings and that kind of stuff. And I probably read a little bit of straight science fiction in there, but not very much. Then I went to college and I read, capital L literature for like, I don't know, like 10 years.
Literary fiction is a genre. It's a genre. It's no different than any other genre. It's just a particular genre with style expectations.
Yeah.
I've got something to say about that in a minute, but yeah. Continue.
and then after I read the literary genre, then I kind of got into science fiction later when I started getting into short fiction because I was working on my master's degree, and I was like, I want to read fiction, but I only have time for tiny little things because my brain is consumed by my thesis paper that I'm writing, right? And so I started reading short stories, and like Clarkesworld was one of the first I went to, which, they go back and forth, but for some reason I connected more with sci-fi stuff, and I kind of went more into a sci-fi direction from there. I never struggled with any of that, with any of my reading. I can't never remember a time thinking, like, not understanding what was happening.
Well, okay, so it's funny. Let me give my complete history here with my reading. So like when I was really, really little, I was into science fiction and horror. Those were like my main two because, obviously Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
And my family being like my grandma and my aunt being in love with Stephen King. So I was like, ooh, because whenever I was around them, they'd show me horror movies and stuff. So I was like big into that. So I was looking for Star Wars type books, and my library had these science fiction collections for kids. So I devoured them. And they're all short stories. And then all the horror I was getting, like that was being smuggled to me because, obviously I was too young to read the, Clive Barker and Stephen King was all like classic horror short stories. So I was a lover of short stories from an early age. When I was in teen years, that's when I got more and more into horror, less and less into science fiction. I then got into like my college years is when I like got over my struggling with literature and actually fell deep into the literature hole, I guess you could say. And I just like when it clicked with me, I just went nuts over it. And then I got into experimental literature. It was also the time I was really big into David Lynch too. It was the 90s. It was the 90s.
Kind of go together. Yeah.
It was the 90s. It was like, all that stuff. So I got into I was writing experimental literature at the time. That's how I got my start. I got published in the small press. I look at it now and I read it now. I'm like, technically, I was writing science fiction and horror combined, but in a way that they called it literary and they called it experimental because I was doing science fiction and horror stuff, which is kind of funny. I'm like, yeah, of course they would consider that experimental,
yes,
but like anyone else wouldn't,
No.
So, yeah.
I would argue that there is definitely a literary experimental edge to your work, though. Not just the surrealism that you use, but like you use repetition a lot, for example, I've noticed. In fact, to the point where in Glass House, I was like, what's up with threes? Because you would say things in threes so much that I'm like, what is happening,
Oh, I don't even notice my little tics anymore.
That's relatable.
It's like, and like Darren, who's like, Darren Bradley, he edited this and he caught quite a few, but some of them he's like, this is actually really like, there's a nice rhythm to it, so we're not going to take this out. Like, okay, that's fine. We'll leave it in. Because like, I spent a long time trying to develop my voice. I know that sounds so pretentious, but like it's true. Like I was trying to write, this is like my late teens, early 20s when I was doing all that experimental stuff. I'd like try and write like James Joyce, and then I'd try and write like Hemingway, and I tried like really long convoluted sentences like, oh, what's his name?
But Paul, teens and 20s, that's the definition of pretentious.
I was going to say the exact same thing.
It's fine. We all go through it.
I wanted to be Kerouac for a while. Besides
yeah.
writing stuff like that, and a lot of that earlier stuff, it's so funny because I hadn't read Valenti yet. But a lot of the early stuff really reads a lot like Catherine Valenti. It's so funny.
Huh.
Like,
Neat.
yeah, I was just trying like all this stuff. And then like I was paring it down. And it took me years until I finally got to what I wanted. And now I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I just write, and it's like stream of conscious kind of, and then I have to go back and edit and try and edit out some of the repetition because like I know it can get kind of annoying, but sometimes it can be really good and nice, and very like poetic. So it's one of those things where it's a judgment call because I don't want to annoy, but I also don't want to, have it lose what makes it work so well.
Right.
It was interesting for me to read, because I read The Glass House first.
Yeah.
And noting that stuff. And I picked up on some of that sing-songy stuff. You know what I mean? I think, for me, a lot of things are auditory. That's kind of why I got into writing when I was in my teens and 20s was, I was originally into music, and then the music and then the words, kind of like how the words went with the music. And then I kind of got more into the writing side of it. And then I kind of moved back to music. Well, I moved back and forth throughout my life, but yeah, I really picked up on that in there. And then it was interesting to read that. Also, let me say that there was a lot of musical references, and the Sunshine Family,
yes.
which is the cult family, also has a band, and they had records and stuff like this. Okay. Which is a big part of the novel. So this is also why this is occurring to me at the same time. And then,
side note real quick. All those songs, I actually have chords and stuff for them.
Cool.
Oh, really?
I wrote them out on guitar. Yeah.
Love it. I do that too. If I write a song in the story, it actually exists. It's a real song.
I so enjoyed writing the songs for that book.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that. I can see if I can remember where I was going in the first place. And so it was very interesting to go back to Close Your Mouth, Close Your Eyes.
Oh, Close Your Eyes. Yeah. That's the two novellas back to back.
Yes. So then I went and read that, and then I was like, no, he was doing stuff similar in this book. This is just your voice. So I wanted to talk about that because you have a very distinct voice, in my opinion, pretentious or not as that may be.
Thank you. Thank you.
Talk about how you went about developing that and how you came to be where you are.
Well, okay. Yeah. So it was like I said, it was like in my teens and 20s. I was really working very hard on I was reading a lot of different writers and stuff, and I was just working on my voice. I was writing a lot of poetry at the time too. And I wanted to be unique and be interesting. And I wanted to be like these writers that I thought had like such an interesting voice. And I didn't like reading boring books, like books that didn't have a music to them. You know what I mean? Like the prose doesn't have a music to them. And so I wanted that. And so it was like, I worked on it. I worked on like trying to get the rhythm down. I'd actually would take some of my favorite short stories and I'd retype them out on my typewriter, just like absorbing it. You know what I mean? Like trying to get the feel for it. And then when I'd write, I'd try. And it was like, at first, like a lot of the stuff was too convoluted. I like definitely crammed a lot of stuff into sentences. Like the sentences were very long and kind of went on tangents and things like that. You could say, I mean, it was probably very interesting, and it's probably very well written, but like looking back, you know how it is when you look back at your younger stuff, you're embarrassed, and I just kept trying and I kept whittling it down for a while. There was like a period where I was writing stuff I got into Kelly Link and I just loved her very short sentence structure that had like its own kind of rhythm to it. And to me, it was very like beautiful in its simplicity. And so I tried doing that. And then I tried mixing them up and like making shorter and longer ones and stuff. And then I read some Catherine Valenti and I was like, oh, this reminds me of my other stuff. And so I kind of messed around with that for a little bit too again. And I think you can see that in Open Your Eyes specifically. Because I think that in Open Your Eyes, it reads different than Close Your Mouth.
Which is the first novella of the two. And they were written some distance apart, right? Yeah,
10 years apart. So I wrote Open Your Eyes in, I think, 2011. And then 2021, it was 2008. And then 2018, I wrote Close Your Mouth. And then we put them together we wanted to do it as an ace double. And then it was published by Apex. And they're like, oh, that's really expensive. So we'll just do it as a regular paperback then. Because we were going to do it like flipped on either side stuff too, so you could flip it over and things.
Yeah.
That would have been so much fun, but it's fine. So it was technically just a fix-up novel. Then we threw in a short story in the middle, which I wrote the short story after I wrote Open Your Eyes too. So, and Open Your Eyes was a lot of fun. And it kind of made a little bit of waves and got some buzz when it first came out because it was very different from the science fiction that was being written at the time. Because a lot of people, it was combining new weird with like hard sci-fi and trying to go with the magical realist kind of thing. So it was an interesting thing because there's a lot of magical realism, but there's actually a lot of hard sci-fi in there too, which was under the hood. And I think some people loved it and some people got angry about that because they're like, choose one, don't do both. And I get it. And then when I went back and did Close Your Mouth, it was a bit harder to get back into that kind of surrealism and magical realism because I hadn't been like that extreme with it since that one. And so it was a bit of a work to get back into that frame of mind and to have the characters. And so I cheated a little and set it like really, really far into the future and say, okay, well, these characters, since they can be reborn and cloned and cloned and cloned, and, they have soul catchers similar. Well, I didn't call them soul catchers, but they're similar to the soul catchers in the Culture series. They would be completely different people and they'd still probably be alive. So I wanted to like use that as an excuse to having the characters be different, so different.
Yeah.
Some people were angry about the differences because they liked, oh God, what was her name? Not Atsasu, Mary, the woman with the half her face is filled with like mechanical butterflies.
Yeah.
They really liked that. And then I changed that. And I'm like, oops, sorry.
Just my opinion. I kind of like the second one a little bit better.
I do too, actually.
I could tell that you were a more developed writer at that point, and it was more gothic, and I like gothic stuff. So
yes.
So you mentioned a new weird. So we don't talk about horror stuff a lot here. Like this is one of the very few episodes where we have talked almost exclusively about horror stuff. Yeah. Can you just explain what the new weird is?
Well, a correction. New weird originally wasn't horror.
Yep.
So have you read Peterdo Street Station?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's New Weird. That was the benchmark for the New Weird. So Jeff Vandermeer's Ambergris trilogy, that was New Weird. So back when New Weird first came out, it was a combination of new wave sci-fi and weird, like Weird Tales magazine style weird.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more like, a combination of pulp, like Conan the Barbarian and some Lovecraft mixed with new wave style sci-fi like Philip K. Dick, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit more fantastic. They bridged a lot of genre boundaries a lot, which also made people mad because like people were reading like Peterdo Street Station. Like, well, why is there magic in here? This is obviously a science fiction novel and things like that. And so I wanted to do
deal.com.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's my opinion too. That was a groundbreaking book, blew my mind, It took me forever to get into it, but once it clicked, it just was like boom. And I want to do that with a space opera. Because I didn't think at the time no one had done that yet. Since then, there's been a few other people that have done it. And I think some of them, I would say some people have done it better just because, I'm a fan of their work. And you know how authors can be humble and all that sort of stuff. I know I should be like, I'm the greatest, buy my books. But with this one, I'll say The Stars Are Legion by Cameron Hurley.
Oh, that was something. Yeah.
She did new weird space opera fantastically. I mean, just amazingly so.
That was so good. Yeah.
She's one of those authors that I just need to get to, and I just can't seem to.
Yes.
I need to bring her. We need to get her on the podcast so I have an excuse to read her work.
Was that the right title?
What we could do.
Was that the right title, The Stars Are Legion?
The Stars Are Legion, I'm pretty sure, yes.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I'm not confusing it with someone else's book. I think it is, yeah.
Let me just double check. I have my computer in front of me. I will clicky clack and we will do that. Yeah, no, that is the one. Okay, yeah, I thought for sure. Yeah. No, that was great.
Yeah. Oh my God. Love that book. I read that and I'm like, this is what I actually read that before I wrote Close Your Mouth, the sequel to Open Your Eyes, which is hilarious. Jason Sizemore made a joke. The editor and publisher of it made a joke, was like, what's the third book going to be called? Big Surprise. And I'm like, that's tempting. Yeah, because I had read Stars Are Legion. I'm like, oh my God, this is what I wanted to do with Open Your Eyes. And I didn't realize, I thought I did it, but I think she did it so much better. And so when I went back in for Close Your Mouth, that's what I did, was I pulled from that a lot. And that's much more of a haunted house novel, I think. Or rather a haunted labyrinth in space.
Yes.
You've got creepy dolls, which I love. And it's more grounded in a good way. Because I was trying for something very just out there with Open Your Eyes. And since then I've been trying to balance it more with like grounding it, because I think with readers, at least I know when I'm reading a book, I like when there's like an anchor to it. You know what I mean? When I'm reading something, even when it's like experimental or when it's like very surreal, I still want there to be an anchor. And when there are things that don't have that anchor, I don't like it as much. I'm thinking very recently, Charlie Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things.
Oh, okay. I heard of it.
I wanted to like that, but it didn't work for me. Or like, and I know I'm going to get like some New Weird fans or some like surrealist fans are going to be like, my God, what is wrong with you, Paul? But I didn't like some of David Lynch's stuff. I didn't like Inland Empire. I just couldn't get into it. Season 3 of Twin Peaks didn't really quite work for me. There's some beautiful parts in it.
Yes.
But it didn't have that anchor for me that the first season had, which was Dale Cooper.
Right.
And also there was like, even though there's surrealism, but there was also the sense of realism underneath it. Like it felt grounded somehow.
Yes.
And I kind of I've been wanting to do that more and more, you know, as much as I love the opening to Open Your Eyes, where it's literally, she's having literal sex with a supernova.
Yes.
Now I'd look at it and go, okay, how does that work even? You know?
Right.
You know, and it was fun writing that. It was abstract. And it was like, basically I was throwing a grenade, you know, but I was also 28.
Yeah.
You know, and just like, yeah.
And the far side of 40 looks a little different, doesn't it?
It does. And like when I wrote Close Your Mouth, I was 38. And like at that time too, I was trying to like, okay, you know, I've read Stars of Legion. I'm like, you know what, I want to go through that. You know, I want to do something similar to that. And I'm glad I did. I think I really like it better. I think it's more of accomplished work. It's definitely more horror. It is.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's definitely science fiction horror. Well, the first one like hinted with it and kind of flirted with it, you know. I think I did. That's a more horrific one, and I have Cameron Hurley to blame for that one.
Awesome.
To go back to Glass House a little bit, I am very curious. Like, have you been influenced by Mike Flanagan's work? I mean, did you write that before those shows started coming out, or?
I wrote that when Haunting of Hill House came out. I was already a fan of Oculus. I loved Oculus.
Right.
Absentia was really good too, and I liked The Haunting of Hill House. His Bly House didn't work for me, and I just watched Usher. And as a fan of Poe, I was kind of let down. I'll be honest.
I have not watched that one yet.
Even though I really like Flanagan's work, I especially, Oculus. I love Oculus. But Oculus was an influence on it, for sure. And Haunting of Hill House was too, because they came out right when Haunting of Hill House came out while I was working on this. And Oculus I'd watched the year before. I think Hereditary came out the same year. And that, funnily enough, the trailer for Hereditary is what inspired me to do a haunted house novel, because the trailer looked like a haunted house movie.
Ah.
And so I was like, I want to write a haunted house novel. So I started working on it. Then I saw Hereditary. I'm like, that's not a haunted house movie. But it also made me realize like I could do more than just a haunted house novel with this then.
Yeah.
So that was also part of the, throwing in everything, including the kitchen sink.
I mean, to me, the influence was very clear.
Yeah, there was.
And I love Haunting of Hill House. To me, that's probably the scariest TV show I have ever seen.
Well, I would have to disagree just on one. Salem's Lot.
Yes.
I've never seen that one.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I saw that when I was little. I just, boom.
Yep.
Yeah. Like the little kid scratching at the window. Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
So good.
The haunted house movie that I should not have seen, but I saw when I was very little, was Poltergeist. And
oh, me too.
Definitely
I have genuine trauma about that one, actually.
Yes.
I had to keep my closet closed after that.
So my aunt came over once. It was being shown on TV late at night, and she wanted my parents to see it with her, as well as several of their family members who also love horror. Not my parents. My parents like, you go upstairs. You're not watching this. Like, it's still daylight out. Like, no, upstairs. And so, of course, I had to hide at the top of the stairs and watch it.
Mm-hmm. Of course you did.
And that fucking puppet.
Right.
Holy crap. And the tree. And scared me so bad.
Yeah.
Loved it. I loved it and hated it at the same time. And so I didn't sleep that night.
Yeah. I had some real nightmares. I was jumping away from my bed because I was afraid things would grab me from underneath it.
Yes. Oh my God.
I had a little writing room in my closet that I had already developed, like the little
Nice.
hidey hole. Right? And it had like this light, and the light was like the same kind of brightness and look as the light in the closet in Poltergeist.
Oh no!
I couldn't go in there for like a month. Yeah.
Oh my God. I had something similar. It wasn't a closet, but there was a chair in the living room, like a nice old overstuffed chair. And behind it, there was a heat vent. And so I'd sit on the heat vent behind it. That'd be my little writing hole, my little writing.
That's cool. That's cool. I can get behind that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Much fun. I love how we've all been scarred by Poltergeist. Thanks, Poltergeist.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Poltergeist. Thank you, 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
80s horror. Let's traumatize the children. Like, I saw it as a kid. It just like...
No, I read that. When I was 11, 12 when I read it. I've told this story before, right? Like I was intrigued by the plot of The Dead Zone when I saw it sitting on my mother's table. She read a lot of Stephen King, right? And I picked it up and started reading it. She took it away from me, as she said, you are not allowed to read this. This is absolutely inappropriate for you. And she hid it, right? So 6 months later, it's in a box at the top of the basement stairs because she's getting ready to take it back to the used bookstore to trade it in. And I picked it up and started reading it again, right? And she said, you're just going to keep reading this, because she caught me at it. I thought I was clever, but I'm not, and she's like, you're just going to keep reading this, aren't you? If I take it away, you're just going to take it back again. And I'm like, yeah. Right. And she says, you realize this is just a story, right? I'm like, of course.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay. And then within like a couple of weeks, I had an adult library card and was allowed to take out anything I wanted at the library. So, very formative moment, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with me and it, I didn't read it when it came out, but like when it first came out in print, my grandma was babysitting me.
Right.
And I actually go over this in my short story anthology introduction. And so like it had like the hand coming out of the sewer grate. It's like a lizard hand, like monsters. Yes. I love monsters. Yes. And so I said, tell me about the monster. And so my grandma's like, well, it's a clown. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound scary. And she's like, oh, it's not like a normal clown. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound, I wanted a monster. She's like, okay, here. And she read me Georgie's Demise. Oh. And I was like, tell me more. And she started reading the scene where the gay couple almost get killed. And she started reading it and started hearing gay slurs. She's like, I shouldn't read this part to you.
Yeah.
And so she's like, and she read me the part about the bike next. And like, I was just absolutely hooked. I wanted to read more. And like, I kept asking her and my aunt, who's, like I said, only 7 years older than me, for bedtime stories, like scary ones. And they would, by memory, tell me Stephen King short stories.
That's kind of cool.
Nice.
Yes. Including like The Boogeyman, which traumatized me.
Yeah.
Wonderfully so. Traumatized me. I loved it. I just loved it. I loved being scared. It was terrifying. And yeah, I was so scared as a kid. Like I was terrified of everything. Oh, there's another really kind of funny story with that sort of stuff where I was a kid and I was reading The Telltale Heart. And my parents, my youngest sister was being born. And so they were building a wall because me and my brother were living in the master bedroom, sharing a room. And so they're building a wall between the two so they would have a room for her. And they're prying up a loose floorboard. And because they heard it was hollow. It was hollow. And they're like, oh, we're going to pry up this floorboard. And I'm freaking out. Like, don't do it. Don't do it. There's something hard under there. I'm like, I'm freaking out. And it turned out to be a box of condoms.
Nice.
Very nice.
Like an ancient box of condoms, like covered in dust, like with like real mouse turds around it and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like so terrified. And it was like, yeah. And the other story that terrified me at that time was actually written by, who wrote The Great Gatsby?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
It wasn't Fitzgerald, was it? No, it was.
I cannot believe we all get all of our writer cards get taken away now.
Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Or Grapes of Wrath. Who wrote The Grapes of Wrath?
That was Steinbeck. The Grapes of Wrath.
Steinbeck. I keep getting Steinbeck and Fitzgerald confused. So Steinbeck wrote a horror story that was published in Weird Tales called The Fair Rue M something or another. It was a very Poe title. And it's about evil chewing gum.
What?
And it scared the crap out of me as a kid.
Wow.
As an adult, I reread it and it's just hilarious. As a kid, like reading about a kid who can't stop chewing because this gum is making him chew, and he's like, his face is like tearing like arf and stuff and is like freaking him out. And I'm reading this, and my mom comes up behind me and goes, boo. And I jump a mile high and scream. And, it was like all because of, Steinbeck and chewing gum. So
That's funny.
Yeah. You'd have to look that up now. That sounds really interesting.
It is.
Stephen King's short story, The Boogeyman, is still one of my favorite horror short stories. That story is amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I refuse to watch the movie because I will be let down.
Yes.
All that stuff that he put in Night Shift, that was that stuff was
so
great.
good.
That was a good one.
So good. Night Shift and Misery were the first things I took out on my first adult library card when I was 12. Even though the librarians looked at me like I was insane. I took Misery out because when I was in Texas visiting my grandparents, there was a cutout promoting it. And it was just a wheelchair with the shadow of an axe over top of it, like a person holding an axe. Yeah. And I was like, I want to read that so bad. They would not let me go anywhere near it. And so when the first thing I got back, because they turned 12 that August, and I got it out and I read it and I was just glued to the pages. I could not stop turning the pages. And my friend called me and I hung up. And he called me and I hung up. And my mom said, you have to answer that. And so I said, hey, what's up? He's like, it's your friend Chris. I'm like, I'm reading a book. Leave me alone. And he's like, I'm your best friend. Aren't I more important than a book? I was like, Paul Sheldon is about to have his knees chopped off. And then I hung up.
Yep. Yeah. The readers among us all know, get yourself other reader friends. If they don't understand that conversation, you don't want to associate with them. You will not get along. They will get mad at you at some point.
But it's also stuff like that why I was worried that I'd be ignoring my kids at some point and they'd see what would happen to them.
Right.
Oh yeah, I used to get completely lost in a book too.
I love that.
Hey, okay, so I'm gonna do an absolute left field, change a topic here and trust the neurodiversity of everybody because I recognize that we've been at this for a while and I want to have an opportunity to talk about it. Right? Tell me about Bad Writer. I have heard about this game and I am very excited.
Okay, so it's a game I wrote in 2 weeks. I've been writing video games off and on since I was probably 18.
Sure.
And so all my games are 2D games with pixel art because that's how I learned how to do it. And so it's mostly a hobby. And a few times I was like, I could try and do this for a living. And then no, that's not. So I was batting around ideas on Twitter. I'm like, as you do, we're talking about how publishing, especially publishing short stories, is like a video game. And I was like, well, how would that work as a video game? Because, we're all nerds. That's what we do. We ask the big questions like that. So how would this work? What are the rules of how it so we talked about and stuff. I'm like, you know what? I think I could do this in a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And so I sat down and I used pre-existing some tile art. I made the sprites. I wrote the code really quick because it's fairly simple. And I just had so much fun writing it. And everyone seemed to be into it. And at first I was like, well, maybe I should release this for free. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to see if it actually has legs. So I released it for $3 and it had legs. People went nuts over it. I was so surprised. I was like, I really struck a nerve here. It was just wonderful. I mean, because I poured my own writing experience in writing short stories because I love short stories. Like I said, that was my first love as a reader. And what I wrote for the longest time was short stories. And it just made my heart so happy that I could do it. And I wanted also to show people that rejection is just something that happens.
That's a hard lesson for a writer to learn, but it certainly is. And it has nothing to do with you. Mm-hmm. I published an anthology myself. So, I get it from the other end too. I had to reject stories that I thought were amazing because either they were too long or they were too similar to another story that, I had already accepted, or it just didn't fit the vision that I had for the project. Right. And it had nothing to do with the writing or the writer. It was just, it's not going to fit for this project. So yeah, that's a hard lesson, right? Especially when you keep knocking on the doors because the market it's shrinking all the time, especially in short fiction. Lately. We're all so struggling to make this industry work in this age of capitalism that does not support it at all. No. Right. And, there's so many of us who are just trying to get our voices heard. Who do you pick? Right.
Yeah, no, it's exactly it. Because I also did some time in the slush mines, as they say. And that was so eye-opening. I approached my own rejections completely differently after that. Because I get it. It's not anything not a big deal at all. And I wanted that to come across. And I also wanted to come across that it's not you. Like, you can't game the market. You just can't.
Nope.
And so that frustrated people who weren't writers playing the game.
Nobody understands the market. This is the thing, that the market is completely, nobody understands it.
No.
The big five, big four now, they don't understand it, right? Nobody has any idea what's going to be successful. The only thing, this is why they're all publishing biographies of famous people. It's the only thing they will sell. Nobody has any idea what'll sell in fiction. Nobody has any idea what the trends are going to be. Nobody even knows what the sales really are at the moment. Because,
oh my God,
we've got the traditional publishing industry, and then the small press industry, and then the independent industry, and it's nearly impossible to gauge it all together. So throw your shit out there and hope something catches. It will eventually.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And I wanted it to have that same feel. And so, like, there is some math going on in the background, but like, okay, so basically here's how it works. Cause I'm a nerd. We got to do this stuff. We got to somehow like make it all like be representative of how it actually works. So like I create an algorithm in the background, and basically the more you write, the better you get, but it doesn't mean you're going to land a story. So your percentage goes up a little, like each time you write a story. So your acceptance percent goes up a little. And then like the more times you submit to the same market, your percentage acceptance like ability goes up a little, because, you get to know the editor.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. There's some other stuff that I did in there. Like if you spend some time on social media, it'll make your happiness go down. I'll explain that in a little bit, the happiness meter and stuff.
Cool.
But your acceptance percentage will go slightly up some more. So it slowly goes up a little, but it's not gonna, there's still a large randomness to it too. So even though it's like gamified a little, it's mostly like the whims of the market, and I have some editors like that are easier to sell to, who jibe with what you're doing. That's what it is. Like, it's not that they're easier to sell to overall, but you're in this fictitious world of the game, your character's stories, like their style jibes with that editor. And so like the start of the game, you get a slight little higher percentage there. So there's like, there's a lot of math going on in the background. So there's like some stuff happening to make it, it's not completely random, but there is some randomness there, but it's not something you can gamify either though. I mean, the only way you gamify it is by writing and sending out more stuff. You write, you send more stuff. You write, you send more stuff. That's it. So like basically how the game works is your character has a happiness meter. And at the start of the game, all right, you just got laid off from your job. Your wife said she'll let you like focus on your writing, your short stories. You have 30 days to make it as a short story writer. And then after that, if you don't do it, you have to get a real job. Yeah. So like that's the whole thing there. And so you have a happiness meter. And so you got to keep your happiness up, because if your happiness goes too far down, your character just gives up and gets a normal job.
Yep.
So you've got to balance your happiness with other stuff. And so every day the character wakes up a little sadder because, she's a writer.
I love this so much with all my heart. Yes.
Yeah. So how you make yourself happy in the game is by writing. That's it. That's the only way you can do it. That writing and going for walks with your wife.
Nice.
And it is like a same-sex couple in the game too, because to be honest, like most of the writers I know are female, and a lot of them are in same-sex couples. And I'm like, I want to be representative of like, the science fiction and fantasy community at this point in time, and I think that's a large part of it,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to like be like, oh, it's going to be this white straight guy and he's going to have like his white straight family and stuff, because I'm like, well, that doesn't, I don't think there's a lot of writers that don't identify with that now. So anyway, so yeah, that's the other way you can be happy, is like you go for walks in parks with her and stuff, and that's it. But writing is the primary way to stay happy. You have to have ideas to write short stories. The only way to get ideas is by doing other stuff, like reading novels and books and stuff, watching TV, going like drinking coffee, things like that. But every time you do something where you're not writing, the character loses happiness points. Because every writer thinks they're a bad writer when they're not writing.
Yes, we do.
That's where the title comes from. And so like so you have to not write in order to get ideas. So like it's this balance, and it's great. I think it's very fun to play, and writers love it because it's so true. And you have a cat. Oh, right. So another way to get happiness points without doing anything else is you pet your cat. So once a day you can pet your cat. So that's a free little happiness bump. But writing is the primary way, and getting an acceptance is the primary way to get your happiness.
Yeah.
Rejections, it goes down. Rejections, it goes down, but writing, that's the best way to do it.
I wrote something every day, even in the middle of my breakdown. Because I'm a writer. That's what I do.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I make myself happy. I wasn't doing a very good job of it, right? I mean, like, I play this game called For the Words, right? I just discovered it this year. My friends told me to get on it years ago. I should have listened. They were so right. It's basically like World of Warcraft, right? You fight monsters and do quests and stuff, only it's all about how many words you write. Like, this monster requires 1,300 words to defeat, and you have to do it in 3 hours, stuff like that.
Huh.
This monster requires 200 words in 10 minutes, stuff like that. So I lost more battles than I won.
That sounds like fun, though.
Oh, it's great. Definitely check it out, guys. If you're looking for something that'll keep you entertained and keep you inspired to keep writing, and you like games like that, this is why I wanted to know about your game, right? I'm like, this meant a lot to me, writing and gaming, and I'm like, this could be, if it helped me, maybe it'll help other people.
Some people actually wanted Bad Writer to be like that. When I was first showing screenshots and stuff, they thought it was like either like a manuscript like thing where you can write your manuscripts and send it out like using a video game format. And I'm like, that'd be cool, but oh my God, how complicated would that be?
It's actually not quite as complicated, right? I honestly
no, not that the one you're talking about.
Oh yeah, well, no, if you were incorporating with all the dynamics you're talking about with happiness meter and acceptances and percentages going, you don't need that. No, that's a different game.
Right.
Yeah,
right, it'd be a different game, but they wanted to gamify their own writing and then had it like actually track their manuscripts,
right,
and like have it sent out to markets. And I'm like, well, that would be kind of cool. But that's not this game. Maybe later. I might actually do something like that later, but I don't know. It was kind of neat though, because it took off. I was really surprised. It became a #1 bestseller on itch.io. It was so exciting. I hope none of my coworkers or my boss listens to this podcast. There was like a week where I wasn't working because I was just sitting there refreshing. It's like, holy crap, it's going up. It's going up. It was like #1. We beat out like this horror game that was so popular at the time. Like, a weird yellow baby game. It was very strange. But I remember my kids like cheering it on. They were so happy.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
And it's funny because my son and my daughter are both writers, and they're like, so Dad, can you help us write and stuff? I'm like, play the game. It'll teach you things about writing.
Yeah.
It can tell you that rejections don't mean anything, but this game kind of proves it to you. I had people, though, who actually sent me emails saying that they got back into writing thanks to the game.
Huh.
Because they were so depressed about rejections before, and it made me so happy. I'm like, that was it. That's why I did this. And I think another important thing is, and this is kind of a spoiler, but it's not. If you beat the game, if you go 30 days, like, and you don't like give up, she doesn't like all of a sudden become a rich bestseller.
Cool.
But I mean, she's writing short stories. That'd be unbelievable as all hell.
Valid.
No, she's at the end. She goes, you know what? She loves writing and she loves doing this, and she's going to keep on doing this. And that's it. That's how it ends. And I think that's the perfect way to end it because, like, I don't want to be unbelievable. Like some games, like where you're trying to create a game dev studio, like the goal is to become like a rich and famous game dev,
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be like inspiring to people, hopeful, like to give people hope, not to give people unrealistic expectations. Because we have too many of those as writers. Oh my God. How many people tell you you're going to be rich and famous?
Yeah. How many people get into this for the money? Spoiler, wrong choice. Okay. Really wrong. Do not.
No, run away.
Well, I think that's actually a really great segue because we have to start wrapping this up because we've been on here for a while.
Damn it.
You wrote it to give people hope. And so one of our last questions is always, what is bringing you hope right now?
Gen Z is giving me hope right now.
Oh, yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, my kids, their whole generation, for one, they hate us, which is fine. Because we're technically we're.
I'm an X-Seal. They don't hate me. They know I'm on their side, man.
Well, I don't know. They call Gen Xers boomers still.
Hey, man, I tell people, and I think they get it. I think you were probably there too, right? I was fighting. I just lost.
Yeah,
I was outnumbered. I'm sandwiched between the boomers and the millennials, and there was never any room for Gen X. I fought, and I failed.
Yeah, we had no coverage. We fought, and then nobody pointed a camera at us.
That's right.
The boomers looked at us and goes, oh, they're not really rebelling. They're not really rebelling. What are they rebelling? It's capitalism? No, they're not really rebelling.
Uh-huh.
They don't know what they're doing. Oh, they made fun of like everything that we're doing. Like the whole
But people are listening to Gen Z though, and that's cool. And I'm really glad.
So happy about that. Yeah, because like even like you had Rage Against the Machine doing their thing. Mm-hmm. People didn't pay attention to it. They just thought, oh, this is a metal band. I'm like, no. Why? Like that whole video they did with Michael, what's his last name? The documentary filmmaker, where they're protesting Wall Street. And
Michael Moorcock.
No, not Michael Moorcock.
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm mixing him up.
Me too.
Michael,
that's the name I wanted to say.
My name brain is just broken now. I'm sorry.
That guy who did Bowling for Columbine and 911. Michael something or another. I'm so going to be ostracized. Anyway. Yeah, I just like they ignored us. But yeah, Gen Z is giving me hope. They're doing amazing work. I'm all for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So what are you working on right now? Anything new that you want to tell us about? Yes. I'm working on my next novel. It's coming out next year in October from Underland, which was wonderful. They gave me a 2-book deal. I was like over the moon. It's called Cancer Eats the Heart. It's a cheery title, obviously horror. And this one's about a girl who was raised to believe that she was the Antichrist and all of her friends. And they're running away from a group of ritualistic serial killers who are hunting them down. And she's trying to discover the truth of who she is. Is she really the Antichrist, or is something else going on? Okay.
Neat.
Yes. So I love the title, Cancer. It's fun. It's a happy story for happy families. And then next year in spring, the other book that was part of the 2-book deal was my short story collection, Skinless Man Counts to 5 and Other Tales of the Macabre.
Awesome.
Yes, which is a fantastic collection. 25 years full of horror stories, all collected under one roof. About 50% of it's sci-fi horror.
Awesome.
That is amazing. By the way, Michael Moore. I wasn't completely in the ozone.
Yeah, that's why it's Michael Moore, not Moorcock. So.
Yeah, because, we're in a science fiction environment.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's the first thing that comes to my brain.
Exactly. Especially after talking about New Wave earlier.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, where can we find you online?
Okay, the Blue Sky, or I'm just Paul Jessup. Twitter, X, I guess, kind of still. I don't do anything there anymore. Also, Paul Jessup. Mm-hmm. I'm on Facebook, and then you got my website, pauljessup.com. I bought that back when domains were like still available and cheap for a lot of names, like in the 90s. So I sat on that, thank God, because nowadays I'm pretty sure it'd been impossible to find. I've got a podcast, actually. I'm going to be doing it. I'm starting the first episode. Halloween Day is when it's coming out, and it's a horror podcast where I get a bunch of horror writers, editors, and publishers together, and we talk about horror. It's called Fear is the Fire That Lights the Heart.
Awesome.
Love it.
Awesome. Love it.
Fun stuff.
That's amazing. By the way, spoilers, if you don't know, it took me a while to figure it out, apparently, right? All the Sifwa people all went to Blue Sky. That's where they are. They all left Twitter. There's been a massive exodus. We're all over Blue Sky now.
Yes.
So come join us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Blue Sky is wonderful.
It is.
I love it. It's the old alt crowd from the BBS days.
Oh my God. Yes, it is. That's it exactly.
I love it so much. You knew, okay, for those who are not old enough to know, right? BBS is, in the early days of the internet, if you went into the channels that were marked alt, this is where all the weird people hung out, right? Yep. It was all the furries and the sci-fi writers and the kinkies and the queers and, all the people I actually want to talk to, right? Exactly. And they are large and in charge, and they own Blue Sky right now. They own the social environment. So it's a lot of fun. I'm loving it.
Me too.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. I love talking to you. I wish we could talk longer, but you know how it goes.
Well, I'd love to be on again some other time, for sure.
Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was our conversation with Paul Jessup. Before we continue on, if you'd like to help out the podcast, don't forget to share us with whatever social media you're using right now, or find us wherever you listen to podcasts and rate or review us. That would be very helpful.
And don't forget, we have a Patreon too. Patreon.com/if this goes on, right? Or if this goes on. Yeah.
Yep. /if this goes on. And if you're, not feeling like you could go out there and dedicate some money every single month, you can also find our coffee account, KOFI, and you can just search If This Goes On Don't Panic and we'll pop up. So you can find us there and give us a one-time donation there. That would be really helpful. I said this in the last podcast, so I'll say it again. At this point in time, we could really use some financial help. In the past, it wasn't really a big deal, but at this juncture, we could really use a little bit of that help. So if you've been holding back because we keep saying we don't need help or whatever over the years, now would be a great time to pull the trigger and help us out. We would really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So that said, what are your thoughts on the conversation?
That was awesome. That was so good. I really kind of needed that. I don't know what it was about the conversation. Just maybe, his mind is so interesting and he was like, bringing so much to the table, but it really, it was very good for me. It did me a world of good. What about you?
Yeah. I feel the same. Paul is somebody who I kind of met him on Twitter and then everybody moved over to Blue Sky. And he's like one of my online buddies I just chat with all the time. He's like one of those people that you instantly connect with.
Sure. Yep.
And I don't know why. Maybe it's because we're just all neurodivergent, or maybe it's because we just have, that plus similar interests, or I don't know. But, for me, that doesn't happen very much, especially now that I'm a much older person. But he is one of those people, and I feel like I could have talked to him for like 3 more hours.
Oh, yeah. No question about it. Yeah. This is the first podcast you and I have been on together. We often kind of wander, but this is the first one where you were like actively, Diane, you got to shut up because we got to turn this off because we're running out of time. Yeah. Cool.
Yes. That's funny. I have noticed over the years that Kat and I tend to go shorter and you and I tend to go longer.
Right.
Weird. But, I think it kind of just is our personalities a little bit. So also Kat's just super busy.
Well, I never shut up. I've tried to like caption myself in, improvised audio dramas. And I'm like, holy shit. Will you just shut up, Diane? Can you stop talking for 5 seconds? Because other people, 2 lines in their caption. Me, it's a paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well, people seem to like it, so I'm not going to worry about it much.
That's funny. That's so funny. One thing I thought was hilarious was our similar experiences with Poltergeist, but also our similar experiences with horror in general and Stephen King. However, I will say my parents were the opposite. They did not care what I read at all.
Right.
So I read things that I definitely should not have read, and it is my mom's fault for putting Poltergeist on when I was like, I don't know, 6 or something.
Oh, dear.
Because she was just like, oh, yeah, you can watch it, whatever. And then, now I'm like, Mom, why would you do that? What is wrong with you? Like, I would never play this for my kids in a million years. Not that I have a problem with them reading horror or anything, because I don't.
Well, remember, we were a lot more free range back then.
Oh, totally.
Which I don't think is a good thing overall.
I don't think so either.
I mean, I do think there's a lot of helicopter parenting that goes on now, and people are paranoid.
Yeah.
But when by comparison, the stuff that I was just allowed to do, I'm lucky to be alive,
Yes, I totally know. So, what are you reading right now?
Comfort food, basically. I am reading more of those Chris Longknife military sci-fi novels that I was talking about.
Ah, yes, you and your military sci-fi.
Yes, and it's it's totally comfort food right now. This is not a sophisticated plot at all, but I'm liking it because it's sort of a spy thriller type military style. This one, they're on the run from the law, but they've got to do this thing. Right. So, right. It's cool. I'm really enjoying it. It I don't know. It's not literary fiction. It's not going to win a Nebula. I don't care. I like it. It's fun. Mike Shepard is the author. If you're into that kind of stuff, you like, heroes and fighting stuff for the right reasons and good guys and bad guys. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's cool.
What about you? What are you reading?
Also some comfort food. I am reading, well, I should say I just finished Sorcery by Terry Pratchett.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Which Probably my favorite Terry Pratchett novel so far. Now, I've been reading them in order, and I've never read them before.
There's an order?
There is, yeah. Well, it's more like publication order.
Gotcha.
But apparently, like, the technology changes.
Can't go wrong with Terry Pratchett. You can't go wrong. He's great.
Yeah. No, and I love sorcery. The first book I struggled to get through. The second book, slightly better, but not much. I liked Equal Rights a lot. And then Mort was after that. I liked Mort. I think I liked Equal Rights a little bit better than Mort. And then sorcery. I like sorcery better than Equal Rights and Mort. So it's just been an uphill, I shouldn't say climb. It's been like just an uphill improvement for him the entire time. Like every book has just been better than the last so far. So
right.
It's been good. Yeah. And then I'm about to start reading Skin Thief by Susan Palumbo, who's our next guest, which is a collection of short stories. So
nice.
Yeah. Should be fun.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
We are keeping hope alive one episode at a time. A special thanks to our guest, Paul Jessup. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey and produced by Ken Schrader. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music by Christopher Snydrowski, and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson.